let's enjoy the conference. Sarah, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. And well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm quite happy to be here today, even though it's online for les Jazettes du premier jeudi. And so my name is Sarah Nicolas. I'm from France, indeed. And the title of my talk is maybe a bit mouthful. So it's how exercise and diet shape your brain through the gut-brain axis across the lifespan. So today we're going to take a walk or a run together from the plate through the gut and all the way up to the brain. So before starting the presentation, I thought I may present myself a tiny bit. So as you can hear, I'm from France and I grew up in Nice, in the south of France, and where I studied neuroscience and I did my PhD. After my PhD, I was very interested in trying to understand the interaction between the gut and the brain. And so that's why I moved to the south of Ireland in Cork, where I joined a lab that is called APC Microbiome Ireland in UCC. So it's University College Cork, which is one of the world leading lab that works on the microbiota gut-brain axis. And this is where I really started to study like how exercise and diet can protect the aging brain, the role of the gut microbiome into that, what's the regulation of inflammation in those conditions, and finally the process of hippocampal neurogenesis, which is the birth of new brain cells, and that I will discuss a bit further later on. However, even though I really enjoyed my time in Ireland for like more than 7 years, I really wanted to go back to France at some stage. And so quite recently, I relocated in Toulouse, so in the southwest of France, where I'm developing my own research program that is looking again at the interaction between the gut microbiota and inflammation in the context of Alzheimer's disease. So I won't go through the detail of that slide, but this is more the outline for today's talk. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you don't understand something that I'm saying because of my accent or I'm speaking too fast, please feel free also to comment on that.
So I will quickly jump in before you get started. Because we're less than 30 people, I've given everyone access to turn on their cameras if they would like, so we can see you all.
Okay.
And you have access to your microphones as well. Please keep those off, otherwise I will disable it again. But if you have any questions, please feel free to chime in or use the chat. All right. So
yeah,
thank
and
you.
you can interrupt me while I'm talking. Also, there is really no problem at all.
Awesome.
Okay, so the first few slides of my presentation will be like I will briefly discuss like our brain through the years. Okay, so what's happening while we are like aging, and so we all know that we are living way longer because now the life expectancy in most of the Western countries is around 82 years, which is about like 30 years more than 100 years ago, which is quite good. But the reality of this overall aging population is that it's not because we are living longer that we are all living like in a healthy way. And unfortunately, not everyone is aging in a healthy way. And in the context of neurodegenerative disorders, and in particular Alzheimer's disease, there is 1 in 9 people over 65 years old that is suffering of Alzheimer's disease. And there is 55 million people worldwide that are living with dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. Dementia is like an umbrella term that will englobe like many different disorders that include Alzheimer's disease. And this number is set to triple by 2050, which is quite concerning. And in the context of Canada, there is approximately 700,000 Canadians that are suffering actually of dementia, and it's projected to reach 1.7 million by 2050. So what happened in our brain while we are aging? So don't worry, I won't put too much science like graphic, but I think this one speaks by itself. So this is a correlation. So you see the line that is going down that linked the size of our brain with the age. So here you have the age from 20 to like 90, and you can see that the overall size of the brain, and in particular the gray matter, which is the composed of like the neurons that are the cells that are in our brain, So this volume is reducing while we're aging. So it means that the brain is kind of like shrinking. And in addition of this physical change, while we are aging, there is an overall decline in like a memory function. And in particular, there is a decline in long-term memory, which is the memory that is important to remember things that you've done a few years ago. And there is also a decline in working memory with age. So you can see here from 70, it kind of like drops. And the short-term memory will be the type of memory that you may use to keep in mind a phone number while you are like dialing. So it's those very like short-term memory process. And the overall processing speed of our brain will slow down. So it means that you still can solve problem, but you may be just a bit longer to do so. And something that is interesting is that the vocabulary, however, is never like changing while we are aging. So there are still some memory process because the way you learn like words, it won't drop with age. And even though this slide may be like a bit scary, the good news is that our brain is able to like change even while we are aging. And this is quite like an amazing process. So the brain is like, we call it plastic because it can adapt and change at every age. So there is three main things that relate to like brain plasticity and the fact that the brain is plastic. So plasticity, it's a process by which the brain can rewire itself. So it can create new connection. So neurons can create new connection between each other. So every time you will learn something new, every time you will exercise, that you will have like a conversation with someone, and even like now tonight, if you're learning anything, you may create like new connections. So this is the brain plasticity. Then there is the process of neurogenesis, which is a scientific process that is still a bit debated in the scientific community, but it's the capacity that we'll have in our brain to create new brain cells, so new neurons throughout life, and no matter at which age, so that you are 40, 60, 80, you're still able to produce new neurons. And in specific region that is called the hippocampus, which is the memory hub of our brain, okay? So every day you may be able to grow new neurons. And finally, another important factor in the fact that the brain can change, it's the lifestyle. So the lifestyle is a bit like the bridge between the new neurons and the new connection between neurons. And it will be everything that you have in your daily life. So everything you choose to eat, the way you move, the way you connect with people, etc. So the lifestyle will really affect those two processes and so promote the overall brain health. So that's it for like the short introduction of like our brain. Now we'll go back down to the gut and in particular our microbiome, okay? So when I say microbiome, I don't know what comes to your mind like first. Maybe you think about germs, maybe you think about sourdough, yogurt, etc., or maybe nothing at all. So there is quite a few interesting things about the microbiome. So first, we have more microbes in one hand than there are people living on the planet. So we have quite a few. The microbes are the oldest resident of the planet, and our body is containing like a lot of microbes, like as much as microbes as like human cells. And within all of those microbes, there is only less than 5% of them that can cause disease. Okay, so it's like a very, very few amount. And when we talk about the microbiome, we also talk about the microbiome in our gut, which is quite popular in the past decade. And so we have like more than 2 kilograms of bacteria that are living in the human gut. And within that human gut, there is more and more and more research about like the composition of those gut microbiota. And in the context of metabolic disease and in particular obesity, now we can analyze the composition of the gut bacteria and be able to predict obesity with an accuracy of more like than 90%, okay? And finally, the bacteria may influence our behavior and our brain because we have more than 100 million neurons that are also living in our gut. And this is why we are calling the gut the second brain. So to sum up a bit those numbers, we have more than 100 trillion of microbes that are living on your skin, but also inside you. So it's like more than the stars that we have in the galaxy. The ratio between the number of microbes and the cells that we have, the human cells that are making up our own body, is like 1 to 1. And if we look at our gut, we have like up to like 2 kilograms of microbes just in our gut, which is nearly like it's also around the size of the brain. Okay, so which is quite interesting. And so, like, what is in a simple definition of the microbiome? It's the community of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other microbes that live on us, and most of them that are, as I was saying, in our gut. So this little infographic, again, to summarize, because I will talk a lot about the microbiota, and I thought it was important to talk about those words. So when we talk about the microbes, it's a community of microorganisms that are viruses, bacteria, protists, algae, and fungi. And all of those that are living in our gut will be called the gut microbiota. And then in some case, we can talk about the microbiome. And so the microbiome will be the genetic material that is present in those microorganisms. And so for today's talk, I will always talk about the gut microbiota, and in particular the bacteria, because those are the microbes that are the most studied, the most handled, and the most known in the overall scientific community. Okay, so most of the research that is done so far is only on the bacteria that are living in our gut, and that as a shortcut we are calling them the gut microbiota. But it's not, the analyses are not necessarily looking at viruses or fungi. So what is the role of the gut microbiota, and what does our gut microbes are doing for us? So before going into the detail, I just want to define two words that are important. So the first one is pathogenic, which means like suffering or disease. So it will be a microbe that will trigger a disease. And then we have symbiotic microbe. And so those symbiotic comes from the Greek, which means live together, a companionship. And those microbes that are symbiotic will be beneficial. Okay, so most of the microbes that we have in our gut and in our skin are symbiotic. So they are like kind of working with us, for us, and we are like just sharing a two-way relationship where we are beneficial for each of us. And so what do the gut microbes are doing for us? So the first thing, they are quite important for digestion because they will help to break down the food that we cannot break down ourselves. Then they are like good producer of some vitamins that, again, either we can't have from the food or we can generate ourselves, in particular the B vitamins and the vitamin K. For the immune system, the gut microbes is quite important because first it will be able to push away any pathogenic microbes. So it will really defend the gut and avoid any possible like disease. And also the gut microbes are important because they can stimulate the immune system. So they can help us and they can help our immune system to identify who is a friend and who is a foe, and being able to protect so against pathogens. And finally, the gut microbes are quite important for the epithelial cells of the gut. So our gut is covered with cells that will be very important to sense nutrient and do the communication between what is inside the gut and what it will goes into the blood circulation. And so the gut bacteria are quite important to protect that layer between the gut and the bloodstream. So while we are like across the lifespan, the gut microbiome change. And so during infancy, so the first exposure to a microbiome is at birth. And then while we are like getting through adolescence, adulthood, and aging, the composition of the gut microbiota will change. And so what does that mean? There is like many research that have been done, and mostly that are coming from Cork, so my former lab in Cork. So there are some articles that have shown that the more diverse is your gut microbiota, so the composition of your gut microbiota, the more you will overall age. So there is like really a link between the way we live, the way the gut microbiota is diverse, and the way we will have like health issue or not while we are aging. So I've put some references here. If you want to have access to the full paper, I'll be happy to share them with you after the presentation. But this is just to kind of show you like one of the main landmark study that was done like now 14 years ago. And that was kind of like really the start of trying to understand the link between the gut microbiota and general health. So I talk about diversity, and so the diversity is like really how many different bacteria species you will have in your gut. And like it's always a bit hard to put a label on like what is a healthy gut and what is not. But overall, what is important is to kind of think about your gut microbiota as a forest. So you want in your forest as many tree species and plants and insects to really have your forest quite resilient, because of course a forest that is very diverse will be more resistant to like a storm, for example, compared to like a monoculture type of like forest. And so a healthy gut will be more resilient to stress or infection. It will promote a better digestion, and it will reduce the overall inflammation in our gut and also in the blood. And on the other side, so an unhealthy gut. So I've put brackets here also because, again, it's not perfectly defined, but there are some redundant in observation, and it's mostly a gut that will have very few dominant species, so less diversity. And those species, they may trigger inflammation in the gut and in the body, and also induce a weaker gut barrier. So it means that nutrients may go more from the gut into the blood, and this may induce kind of like inflammation and other chronic conditions. So yeah, think of your gut like a forest. The more the species, the more resilient will be your gut microbiota. Which brings us now to making the link between the gut and the brain. And this communication is called the gut-brain axis. So it's the constant conversation between our gut and the brain. So the brain affects the gut, and this has been like thought and showed like many times. For example, like I was a bit stressed before the presentation, so I feel that I had maybe butterfly in my stomach, and so really there is a huge influence of our emotion, the stress that may affect the gut, but also just for satiety and hunger, there is a real communication between the brain and the gut. But what is interesting and what is more shown now is that on the other side, there is also a strong influence of our gut towards the brain, okay? And this is really like the center of my research so far. And also that's why we call the gut our second brain. It's also because it has its own nervous system. So the gut talks to the brain through 4 different ways. And so here it's really from the gut to the brain. Okay, I'm not talking about the other way around, even though some of them are bidirectional. And so the first one that is quite popular, it's the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is basically a nerve that goes from the gut, but it also goes to the heart, the lung, etc., and all the way up to the brain. So it's kind of like a highway of communication and a very fast way of communication. Then there is the immune system and immune messenger. So those will be signaling molecules, so small molecules that can be either produced by your gut and that then can go from the gut into the blood circulation and then maybe reach your brain. Then we have the gut hormones that will be hormones that are only released in the gut. And again, they can go through the blood circulation and reach the brain. And finally, we have microbes metabolites. So metabolites are like tiny molecules that are made from by microbe from your food. Okay, so those microbe metabolites will not exist if we don't have microbe, because they need the microbes to be produced. And those are quite interesting because they are small molecules, they can easily cross the gut barrier, goes into the bloodstream, and then reach the brain and have beneficial effects. So sometimes this conversation between the gut and the brain becomes a bit faulty. and we will look at like few situations where this communication is faulty and what are the consequences. So for example, it has been shown in the context of addiction that there is a miscommunication between the gut and the brain, but also in conditions that have like a dysfunctional neuronal activity, such as epilepsy, pain, or multiple sclerosis. Then there is also some evidence showing that in some stress-related disorder, in particular in depression or IBS, there will be a problem in the microbiota gut-brain axis communication, and also in eating disorder. And finally, in neurodevelopmental disorder, even though there is some debate about that still, but there is some evidence showing that there is a dysfunction of the microbiota gut-brain axis in autism. And finally, in neurodegeneration, in particular in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, where there is more and more evidence linking the gut to the brain and showing a dysfunction of this communication. So like my main research is around like Alzheimer's disease, so I will like talk mostly about Alzheimer's disease in the context of today's presentation. And so what is Alzheimer's disease? The gradual decline in memory, thinking, and behavior. And in the brain, what's happening is like there is an overall loss of neurons, so the brain cells, and mostly in the hippocampus, so the memory hub. And if you remember, this is also the region where we can generate new neurons. And so over time, the brain will like shrinks, and Alzheimer's disease is caused by many factors, so genes, age, and lifestyle, and it means that there is no single cause to Alzheimer's disease. So it means that there is no a single like magic bullet against it, but there are many ways to act, and one that is quite important is lifestyle that I will develop in the subsequent slides. So still one more slide with like few numbers, and then I move on. But there is 1 in 9 people, as I said, that are aged over 60 that lives with Alzheimer's disease. And what is quite striking also in the context of that disease is like 2/3 of the people with Alzheimer's are women. And some people are explaining that because women are mostly living longer than men, but that's not the only reason. And the reality that there is more and more research that are trying to understand what's the explanation for those sex differences between men and women in the context of Alzheimer's disease, but there is still not enough research on it. And so to go back to the gut now, there are like some observations that were made in humans that have shown that people that are suffering of Alzheimer's disease will have fewer microbial species overall, so their forest will be less diverse. And within the bacteria that they still have in their gut, there will be more inflammatory bacteria. So there is one genera that is called Bacteroidetes that are increased, and those are more like inflammatory bacteria. And on the other hand, there will be fewer beneficial bacteria, and in particular the Firmicutes, that are bacteria that can produce some specific microbial metabolites that are known to be beneficial for the brain. So if we are trying to do like a link between all of that, in the context of Alzheimer's, there is maybe inflammation in the gut that will induce a weaker gut barrier, so more negative, like harmful molecule that will cross and goes into the circulation, in particular immune signals, and this will induce overall brain inflammation that may feed into the brain in the context of Alzheimer's disease. But an important thing to note here, those are correlation, so those are just like possible hypotheses. And we can say from the studies alone that the gut changed because of Alzheimer's, okay? So those are just like observation, and there is no, again, like causal relationship yet. But then, do these changes in the gut may influence Alzheimer's disease? And this is a study where I contributed to when I was in Cork. And in that study, we performed fecal microbiota transplantation. So this is exactly what it sounds like. it's a serious scientific tool, of course, but you shouldn't try this at home. So basically, we can collect stool from donor and then prepare them in a specific way to then do a transplantation of the microbiome into like a specific donor. And in particular, in the lab, Dr. Stephanie Grabucker, she performed a study where she collected fecal samples from Alzheimer's patients, and she transferred those microbiome into healthy rats to see if transferring the microbiome of Alzheimer's patient may affect the overall behavior and the brain of those rats. And so why did we perform this? So to go back to what I was explaining earlier about neurogenesis, so the birth of new neurons that are happening in the hippocampus, the best way to look at them, of course, is to look into the brain. So we have to look into rodents because they are like the easiest tool to look about like brain changes. And so then Stephanie, what she asked, it was if she transferred the gut microbiome of Alzheimer's patient into healthy rat, if this will affect the hippocampal neurogenesis. And this hypothesis was based on a study showing that patients with Alzheimer's disease will have a strong drop in hippocampal neurogenesis in their brain compared to healthy participants. And so those are images that were taken into the brain of the rats. So basically what you see in greens are the new neurons that are like drawn here on the right also. And so here you have the control FMT. So it's rat that received a fecal microbiota transplant from healthy participants. And you can clearly see the nice green neurons that have like nice branches that are like represented over there. And if you look into the brain of a rat that received the Alzheimer's disease fecal microbiota transplant, you can see way fewer green, even though there are still few. And even if there are still some cells, if you compare like the density, so how many branches, if you think of those neurons as a tree, there is way less branches in those neurons. So it means that transferring the gut microbiota of an Alzheimer's patient affect the overall process of creating new neurons and the way the neurons are also complex and strong. And Stephanie, she performed other tests on those rats, and in particular, she tested their cognition, and she saw in a similar way that transferring the gut microbiota of those Alzheimer's rats will affect the rat capacity, memory capacity. So some hallmarks of Alzheimer's can be transmitted via the gut microbiome. So of course, it doesn't mean that the Alzheimer's is contagious through those ways. Okay, this is just really like in a model, but it means that some of the symptoms may be regulated through the gut microbiome. Which brings us to the fifth part of my presentation, because what is interesting with the microbiome, if it may transfer the symptoms of a disease, the microbiome is also highly susceptible to lifestyle factors, and in particular, exercise and diet that I will discuss today. So when I talk about factors and lifestyle factor, I'm mostly talking about the lifestyle factors that are linked to dementia in the context of like today. And here are all the factors that may affect the proportion of people living with dementia. And depending on when those lifestyle factors like were like observed. And so, for example, you can see in midlife, there is many lifestyle factors that may affect dementia. And if you put those lifestyle factors aside to the factors that may affect the gut microbiota composition, there are like quite few overlap. So for example, I've highlighted a few of them here. So the high cholesterol and the diabetes will be clearly associated with the diet. Then there is also smoking. So it will be like the environment that may affect the gut microbiota, the physical inactivity, so exercise affect the gut microbiota, and other things such as like a depression. So if people are like taking long life like medication, obesity, etc. So there are quite few overlap between factors that are linked to dementia risk and factors that are affecting the gut microbiota. And what is also interesting in that is that before we move on, and there is strong evidence that are showing that midlife, so between your 40s to your 60s, is a very specific time window of opportunity. So because you can see here, there is many lifestyle factors that may affect dementia, but it's also the best time to act on those lifestyle factors, because then you can build up some resilience to your brain for later in life. So really middle age is a window of opportunity for the gut and the brain health. And this can go through changes in the lifestyle. And so one of the first lifestyle I wanted to discuss today, it's exercise. And so of course, I'm sure you know that exercise is good for your heart, your bones, your weight, etc. And this is just a bit of like a scientific explanation of how does it work. And so the main idea for exercise, like when you do some exercise, your muscle will start secreting some specific molecules that are called exerkine, and those exerkines, they can then travel into the blood circulation and then can go up into the brain. And what is interesting also with that is that it can go to the brain, but also to the bones and of course to the gut. And so really exercise, it's like a multi-system intervention because it affects all the big system in your body. And so how does exercise will affect your brain like in reality? So there is quite a nice study that is now 15 years old where they asked people that were between 60 to 70 years old to just walk 3 times a week for a year. And after 1 year doing like fMRI, they looked at the size of the hippocampus. So you remember that's the memory hub, and it's the brain region that is able to do neurogenesis, so produce new neurons through the lifespan. And what was interesting is that the people that exercised, and by exercise, I repeat myself, but it was just a year of walking, and it was walking 3 times a week, they had an increase in the size of the hippocampus. And so you must say, okay, 2%, it's not that big. But if you remember one of my first a bit depressing slide, there is, we are like the brain is shrinking when we are aging. And actually 1 to 2% will be the size by which the brain will reduce while we are aging. And so it means that here the plus 2% are like not only they reverse the brain shrinkage, but is also kind of like slowing it down. And so how does this work? There is many studies in rodent that have shown that exercise will increase the birth of new brain cells, so the process neurogenesis in the hippocampus. It also improves memory and pattern separation. So pattern separation is a behavior that is affected also in people suffering of Alzheimer's disease. So it's your capacity to distinguish between memories that have like high similar overlap. So for example, if you're driving a car, you go every day to your workplace or to the same place, it will be the same parking, but you won't always park in exactly the same parking spot, but you will be able to remember every time where you left your car. So this is the context of a pattern separation. Then, of course, exercise promote the release of exerkines, so those molecules that will benefit from the brain and the body, and it overall reduces inflammation. So this is how we are hypothesizing that exercise may help the brain. And also exercise reshapes the microbiome. So those are like some information that also we collected in Cork. So exercise will change the diversity of the microbiomes. People that are physically active will have more species in their gut. There are more microbial metabolites, so those small molecules that are only produced by microbes, and in particular those that are called short-chain fatty acids that are known to be protective for the brain. And also exercise will help with a stronger gut barrier. So there will be an overall healthier wall between the gut and the bloodstream and will limit the passage of some inflammatory molecules into the blood. And also in some studies in old animals, in aged animals, exercise can offset the loss of brain cells, so it can offset neurogenesis that can be caused by an older microbiome. So really, exercise have like many effects on the brain, on the overall physiology, and also on our gut microbiome. And so to finish up that section on exercise, so what counts as exercise? So the World Health recommendation the World Health Organization will recommend that for an adult, there is like a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate activity each week, plus 2 strength sessions. And so by moderate activity per week, it's like 20 minutes per day, actually. And this can be a mix of different type of activity, because it doesn't have to be running a marathon. This is what I mean. You don't have to cycle for 2 hours. It can be like gentle exercise. So it can be walking, gardening, dancing, swimming, carrying like light weights, etc. And there is quite like an important rule, and that I really want like you to remember for today's talk, is like, first, it's never too late to start exercising, okay? There is always a way that we can change like our lifestyle, and it will never be too late for the brain and also for the gut. And also some movement is always better than none. So it means that even if you just walk 5 minutes after dinner, it's okay. If you take the stairs once a day instead of taking the lift, it's already like a very good start. So really the point of that is not being perfect at exercising, it's just trying to be maybe consistent and try to add in your routine a bit of exercise. Which bring me to the seventh part of my talk, which is about the diet. And so really diet, it's the fact of feeding your second brain, because you will feed your microbes that are in your gut. And as I said, the gut is our second brain. And so before I dive into like some diet details, I just wanted to kind of like demystify some words that are like more and more popular now, even more around like the microbiota field. So the probiotic are the microbes themselves, okay? So it will live beneficial microbes that you can either buy in pills. Yes, some that are very popular, like lactobacillus, for example, but there is also in some food-specific microbes, and in particular that are alive, so such as in yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, and kombucha. Those will be food that will have probiotic in them because they will be mostly made up of microbes. Then we have prebiotic that are the food for the microbes, okay? So this is quite interesting because it's mostly made up of fibers, and fibers are the type of food that we as a human cannot digest on our own. So we really need the microbes to digest those fibers. And you can find fibers in many different types of food, in particular garlic, onions, leeks, bananas, oats, apples, etc. And finally, fermented food that are also quite popular, that will be foods that are made by microbes. And so it's kind of both at once. It's at the same time the probiotics and also the prebiotics. And those are, for example, the sourdough, the miso, the tempeh, fermented vegetables. And so when you eat fermented foods, you will get the live microbes and also the metabolites that they are producing and that are beneficial for the brain and the health. So when we talk about diet and the gut microbiome, like I like this infographic. So you have to think about eat a rainbow, because you have to eat as many different like type of food, and so they have to be like in a different type of color to really bring a lot of diversity. So again, it's all about diversity. So you have to bring diversity of food to your gut to have your gut microbiota being diverse. And so this recommendation of like eating 30 different plant foods each week, it's coming from a large study that is called the American Gut Project, and it's called the 30 plants rule. And so it's not 30 servings, it's just 30 different kinds, okay? And it can sound like a lot, but it's not that difficult actually. So plants will count as fruits, so it can be berries, apples, citrus, grapes. Can be vegetables like leafy greens, broccoli, peppers, whole grains like oats, brown rice, legumes like lentils, chickpeas, nuts and seeds, and herbs and spice. Okay, so there is a huge variety of plants that will count in that rainbow rule. So in addition of those plants, there is also fibers that will be the food for the microbes. Okay, so as I said earlier, the fibers are like very important for the microbes, and as a human, we cannot digest them on our own. And so the recommendation of daily fiber intake is between 24 to 35 grams, and the reality worldwide is like mostly in Western countries, people are more around 14 to 18 grams. So it's less than half than we need. And again, you can find fibers in many different types of food, and in particular in like whole grain. So like if you have like oats, brown rice, but also in some like broccoli, kiwi, etc. And of course, you will find a lot of fiber in nuts, so in almonds, oatmeal, and also in flaxseed. Then another category of like food that the microbes loves are the fermented food that I've discussed earlier also. So like just to insist again on fermented food because they are quite popular. So those are food that are made up with the help of microbes themselves and that will be made then at the end the final product of microbes and the metabolite that they have produced. And they are very, very good for the gut health. Finally, to go now to like more a diet aspect. So one of the most popular diet that is studied, and I'm not saying that because I'm coming from the Mediterranean region, but it's the Mediterranean diet. So the World Health Organization actually recommends that having a Mediterranean-like diet will really help in reducing the risk of cognitive decline and or dementia, and so promote a healthy aging. And there is more and more evidence in Spain, France, and even in the US. So what will you find in a Mediterranean diet? So fruits, vegetables, beans, so oranges, apples, leafy green, chickpeas, but also whole grain, nuts and seeds, so whole meat bread, almond, walnuts, pistachio, and also healthy fat. So that comes either from olive oil or also like fatty fish, such as like salmon. And of course, also protein and meats, chicken, eggs, and red meat, but more with moderation. And finally, some dairy, of course, some cheese, like goat cheese, and also yogurt. And like overall, what is important, like what's the main take-home message here is that it's not like a list of like food that you have to adhere to. Of course, you can have like other type of food, but I think it's all about like having a balance. So you're allowed to have everything. It's more like the proportion of the food that will matter the most. Okay, so it's more like following a pattern and trying to have, again, it's really a mix of like different type of food. So it's diverse food that will then feed your diverse microbiome. Another type of a diet or like kind of like rule that you may try to follow like yourself is that here are the 4 type of food that are like kind of like studied enough to make sure that those food are like have indeed beneficial effect for brain health. So those food are the fiber-rich foods. Again, so fibers are important for the microbiomes. So whole grain, vegetable, fruits. Then food that will bring a fatty acid and in particular omega-3. So fish oils, flaxseed, walnuts. Some food that are called the phytochemicals. So those will be like vegetables that are like very with strong colors, like berries, like blackberries, for example, like cranberries will be like berries with very, very high level of phytochemicals. And finally, probiotic foods, such as fermented foods, kefir, sauerkraut, etc. So all of those, you can see, they kind of like overlap already with the Mediterranean diet and also with like all the food that are a part of the Eat a Rainbow type of diet. So really, it's just like a matter of a balance and having like the most amount of like variety of different type of food in your plate to really promote an healthy gut. So we're nearly there. I'm nearly stopped. I'm done with the talking, like few slides. And so just to put everything together, I kind of start my talk with like maybe a bit of like a bad news because even though we are living longer, not everyone is aging like healthy. And we want to live well and long. And so the good news, I think, and I hope I've convinced you, is that even though we are not all equal in face of like aging, there is many, many ways that we can intervene and change our lifestyle to really act on that and promote a healthy aging. And so, as I was saying, lifestyle is very powerful because there is up to 45% of the dementia cases worldwide that could be prevented or delayed just by changing some of those lifestyle factors. And so here you have the list of the lifestyle factors. So this list was made up by the Lancet Commission, which is a very, very important like scientific commission. Among all of those factors, again, you can identify here physical inactivity. There is diabetes, excess alcohol, obesity that are like more related to like diet, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. but also air pollution and social isolation. So really, those 14 modifiable risk factors, we can intervene on those and may help to prevent or delay the number of cases with dementia. And of course, it's never too late to start. So here I talk about like middle age, because really middle age, it's the time window where we are the more sensitive to those changes, but we are also at the same time sensitive to negative changes, but we are also, the brain is still very, very plastic and can respond very positively to any changes. So if you start like walking 20 minutes a day, you change the diet, etc., you stop smoking, even if it's like after 60, it's already like a very, very good start. And so to conclude my presentation, here are like 5 simple things that you can try to do this week. You just can try to do one, and you can try to do one every week, of course. But first, try to eat more plants. So of course, ideally, you can aim for the 30 different ones over the week, but I know sometimes it's not always like easy. Then try to add fiber to your food. So just swapping the white bread to the wholemeal bread, it's already like doing the job. If you also change the white rice to brown rice, it's also like very good. And then add ferment to your food. So a spoon of yogurt, kefir, or sauerkraut a day. Then the fourth one is like try to move every day. It can be 20-minute walk a day. If you cannot, maybe take the stairs instead of the lift to go like up. And finally, stay connected, because even though I did not really talk about that today, but social interaction is very good for the brain. There are a few studies showing that people that will meet with other people, they may also at some stage share some of a common microbiome on the skin and also in the gut. So really, there is like also an important aspect of like being socially active. And of course, I gave those advice. You don't have to do all of them in one go. There is no, it's better to have like small steady changes, try to aim for like perfection directly. So pick one of these 5 and try them for a week or 2. And that's it for me. I just wanted to briefly acknowledge the Nolan Lab and Professor Yvonne Nolan in particular, because I worked with her in the past like 7 years, and Zoe, because some of my slides that I've presented today are from her. So she's a PhD student working with Professor Nolan and myself. And also I would like to thank the team Remember, that is the lab that I'm working with in Toulouse now, in particular the Dr. Rampon and Dr. Verret, to welcome me in their team. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I certainly learned a lot today.
Thank
We
you.
will open it up to some questions if anybody has some. If not, I have many. Does the aging decline control for the lazy practice of device use and not having to remember?
You mean like the lifestyle, that the way that we are using like too much of like connected device and not having to remember anything? That's a good question. And to be fair, I don't think there is any studies looking at like the overuse of technology in how does this impact aging. Because then the reality also with technology is that you are also more connected to people. So it can also like help with people that are socially isolated, because I was talking about like having social interaction. And of course, it's better to have those in real life, but also being like connected to people online can be at the same time very good and also like very bad in some case, of course. But that's a good question. And I don't think there is anyone working on the overuse of technology and cognitive decline.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that are coming to mind?
I guess the frustrating thing is when you've tried. I mean, I've been eating this kind of diet. My mother was very healthy eating, and yet I still have been told that I have early onset Alzheimer's. So, yes, it's these lifestyle changes, and it was very good because you gave specific ideas of how to move forward. So, increasing the exercise and that type of thing. But it's always a bit frustrating when you see these and you say, oh, but I do that and that and that, and yet I still have it. So it's a bit, I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's good at least to know. And I certainly will tell my children that they should, because they're starting into the middle age range, and say to them, well, maybe you should take even more care before it gets too late and see if you can help make sure that you don't end up with it in the end. But there's no genetics, so at least I didn't pass on any genes, so that's good. I don't have the genetic balance for that. So,
Yeah.
but thank you very much for your.
Unfortunately, like, well, I'm happy you enjoyed the talk, and unfortunately, like as I was saying, like it's not like a miracle like lifestyle, and there is
Exactly.
so many things that are unknown in like neurodegenerative disorder that are still like out of control, unfortunately. So of course, those recommendations that I have and that are from the Lancet are like prediction, and this is like how it was like associated with like a positive outcome. But yeah, I'm sorry that unfortunately it's not the miracle diet or lifestyle.
I can perhaps add a little bit of context to that as well. In you presented data from the Lancet Commission in 2024, and a lot of what we're seeing there are those lifestyle habits that are modifiable. And like Sarah is saying, these are not miracles, right?
No, exactly.
But the way that we kind of usually like to put this into perspective is, if you are somebody who was going to develop Alzheimer's disease and you are following all these healthy guidelines, probably, maybe, you might develop that disease a little bit later on than you would have otherwise. And the progression might be a little bit slower as well if you are following all these things. So even though, people might get diagnosed with this disease, even if they're following all these things, don't sweep it under the rug that you're doing all these good things, right? They are still doing good things on your body and the disease progression. Regardless of that.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And I'm part of a drug trial now of a drug that seems to be working very well and has very little side effects. And that's one of the things I think is also, it's good that it's a sort of, everybody's approaching it from all different directions. And the work that you're doing, Dr. Nicolas, is amazing because that's a sort of a different direction, and that will help, if you like, future, like again, if people in their have much better health control and are doing more exercise and everything, it's very likely then as they go forward into older age, they may not have the same issues that people who did not they didn't even know. It's not even like part of it is that they didn't even know what would have been better. So, but so there seems to be a lot of different approaches being taken, and that's very encouraging. So thank you for your work. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Pamela. We've got another question that came in through the chat. It is, does water intake affect gut microbiome?
Well, water intake will affect the overall physiology. Like it's important to drink at least like 2 liters of water. And of course, I don't think there is specific studies looking at the gut microbiome composition, but if you have a reduced water intake, your overall bowel movement will highly change because we need water to function and we need water to help the digestion and then produce feces. So I don't think there is particular studies, well, not in my knowledge, but maybe there are, that will look at specifically water intake and gut microbiota composition.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience here? I've got one question while you guys think of some more. And that is if you could maybe talk to or speak to the differences that you might have seen between the Mediterranean and the MIND diets, at least from the conferences that I've been going to and readings, that is seeming to become more of a popular diet that is being recommended, this MIND diet. So the mix of the Mediterranean with the DASH diet. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, I have not read that much on that in particular. The only thing that I would say is like, and like again, studies with diets, like what you were talking about the Lancet Commission, and what is interesting is that exercise has been shown to be significantly being able to affect, while the diet not. So even though there are predictions, and so the problem with like diet studies is that we work with human, and so there is many things that we can't control, and like to have like read some like diet papers. So I don't have a proper answer for like the Mediterranean diet and which one is the best. I don't think there is one that is better than another. My overall gut feeling, if I may say, is that it's just a matter of like balance, having something that is diverse enough to really like feed the gut. So whether if it's like the mind or the DASH diet or the Mediterranean, I think it's just a matter of like balancing the food that we're getting. And I know for a fact that sometimes getting like microbiome data on those studies, it's always a bit complicated because it's always hard to compare like at a specific time point, different population that will have a different diet because you don't know what was the starting point of those people. So now in microbiome research in the gut-brain axis field, people are trying to do longitudinal studies. So instead of comparing someone that has the MIND diet with the DASH and or the Mediterranean, they will more look into, okay, the microbiome of that person on the first week was this way, and after 12 weeks or like 6 months of having the diet, this is how it changed, and this is how it like the bacteria like are less inflammatory, etc. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. And that was you cited a paper a little bit earlier that was talking about a 2% hippocampal volume increase, right? With people who are doing exercise 3 times or walking 3 times a week. What kind of phenotype did that translate to, if any?
So in that paper, they also look at memory and
Okay.
processing speed, and they also had a small increase. So I was talking at pattern separation. So that's our ability to distinguish between memories that are like in a very, very similar context, but that are different. And this is one of the first deficits that we may observe in people that are suffering of Alzheimer. And those people that were walking were also better at that task. And then again, those are correlation, but the main idea behind the fact that the hippocampus have increased is that it's likely they have done new neurons, so that it has promoted neurogenesis. And there are many studies in rodents that have shown that pattern separation, so that memory process is highly reliant on neurogenesis. And so then based on those observations in rodents, the authors were able to say that, okay, it's likely like linked, but again, those are like observation.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I think those are all the questions, unless anyone has a last one here. Doesn't look like it. All right. So then let's all thank Dr. Nicolas for taking time after work to come speak with us today about this very interesting topic. And I will remind everyone once more, a copy of the presentation will be sent to you afterwards. And if you're interested in learning about other interesting topics from other interesting speakers, you can check that out on our website for the next presentations. So thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon or good evening.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye.